So earlier this week, Sony had their PlayStation meeting, I guess they call it now. Basically, they were introducing the PS4 Slim, which has already been purchased by people in many areas, and the PS4 Pro. We're not really going to go into the Slim too much. It's basically just a smaller version of the PlayStation 4, missing the optical output and with a redesigned USB port locations on the front. That's really about it. Instead, we're going to be talking about the PS4 Pro, where it sits, and how it's going to work with relation to the potential of the Xbox Scorpio, as it's being called. So, looking at the specs here, the PS4 Pro, basically the CPU is more powerful. I think I said it's about twice as powerful. And the GPU is running at 4.2 teraflops. Now what this does is this puts the PlayStation 4 Pro slightly above the GTX 970 and the GTX 1060 in terms of teraflops, raw floating point operations, but below even the GTX 980 and definitely below the 980 Ti, the 1070, or the 1080. For reference, as you can see on the screen now, the 970 has 3.9 teraflops, the 980 has 5 teraflops, the 980 Ti is 5.6, the Titan X is 6.2, the 1060 is sitting at 3.8, so it's right around the 970. The GTX 1070 is 6.5 and the GTX 1080 is 9 teraflops. Now the reason that this is important is because of how we're looking at what they've claimed. They've said that the PlayStation 4 Pro is designed with 4K gaming in mind. I have to point out that a lot of the games that were being shown did not have native 4K support. They were often upscaling from a lower resolution to 4K. There were a few games that did have native 4K support. I believe The Last of Us Remastered. I don't know, is this going to be The Last of Us remastered at this point? I don't get it. Still a good game, but really it's going to be like the second remaster of it for this generation. That did have a native 4K support mode, but it was locked at 30 frames a second. So, when we look at the speeds here, it's quite obvious that the PS4 Pro is not really going to be able to do native 4K gaming, especially at 60 frames a second. Period. Okay? Now, to be clear, even the GTX 1080, depending on the game, has a lot of trouble running games at 4K at 60 frames a second. Okay? Games like Tomb Raider get like 48 frames a second, Rise of the Tomb Raider, I should say. And games like Hitman barely hit 40 at 4K. Now, at 1080p, 1440p, the GTX 1080 definitely hits 60 frames a second, no problem, for just about everything out there. As a matter of fact, the 980 Ti at 1080p can destroy games at 1080p at 60 frames a second. It's overkill for those. But what this does mean, though, is that older titles and pretty much all newer titles that come out will definitely be able to hit 1080p 60 frames a second on the PlayStation 4 Pro, even if it ends up upscaling them to 4K if you have a 4K display. Will it hit 1080p 60? No. Nope. It's not going to. The 970 can not do it. The 980 is really unable to do it. So is the Ti. Again, depending on the game and how graphically intensive it is. But for the most part, no, they don't hit a consistent 4K at 60 frames per second, despite the fact that they are more powerful than what the PlayStation 4 Pro is offering. Now, on the flip side, the Xbox Scorpio is said to be around 6.2 teraflops, So that puts it at about the Titan X range, slightly below the 1070. But even then, again, the Titan X has problems running games, and so does the 1070 and the 1080, at 4K natively 60 frames a second. So as a result, I don't really foresee the Xbox Scorpio being able to produce 4K at 60 frames a second either. I think that both consoles may be able to do 4K at 30 frames a second. The 980 and the 1070 and the 1080 can definitely do that. So even though it's running on the Radeon architecture that AMD just sort of put out with their newest graphics cards, I'm not expecting 4K right off the bat. Not 4K natively. However, also the PlayStation 4 Pro is designed to really help out with the PlayStation VR, which was codenamed Morpheus. And the reason for that is VR needs to have a certain frame rate or it can start to cause motion sickness and headaches in people. And honestly, the PlayStation 4 and the regular Xbox One do not really have the capability of pushing out 90 frames per second in VR. That's just all there is to it. The Xbox One is less powerful than the original PlayStation 4, so that definitely can't do it. As a matter of fact, the VR modes that Microsoft is talking about are almost all going to be exclusive to the Xbox Scorpio at this point. Because just really the Xbox One can't handle it. The PlayStation 4, again, it's not going to really be able to handle it that well, but the PlayStation 4 Pro is supposed to be able to do it, and I do think it will. I do think it will help. It'll probably, for VR, be able to get the 1080 up to the 90 frames per second mark that people want. So let's talk about some other things. It still has 8 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM. This looks to be smaller than what the Scorpio might have, based off of the graphic that was shown of the Scorpio coming together. It looks like it actually has about 12 gigabytes of memory. However, when we're talking about memory for consoles, we have to remember this is a unified memory architecture. That means that the RAM is being used not just by the graphics card or the graphics chip. It's also being used by the CPU, it's being used by the operating system, everything. The sound, everything is going through that. So that 8 gigabytes of GDDR5, even though it's nice and quick and everything else like that, it's not really all being used just for the graphics. And you see that on PlayStation 4 titles now. There are quite a few PlayStation 4 titles that cannot maintain 30 frames a second, in some cases, at 1080p. And definitely not 60 frames a second at native 1080p. And you get the same thing on the original Xbox. It has a hard time hitting 60 frames a second at 1080p for most games. And some games use like a dynamic resolution scaling, or they lower the frame rate of things in the background that you don't see as clearly to try to keep the main action at 60 frames a second. Basically a lot of tricks. Alright? Now, I am aware that the consoles do have an advantage over the PC market in the fact that, well, you know what the hardware is going to be, so you can optimize for that hardware. That's something the PC market can't really do. The PC market has to account for multiple setups, varying cores on the CPU, different speeds and different amounts of regular RAM, different video cards with different amounts of RAM, that sort of stuff. So you don't get the God, my fucking brain just went. You don't get the optimization ability that you do on consoles. And you start to see it by the end of a console generation. Stuff that comes out at the end of a console generation looks leaps and bounds better than stuff that came out early in the console generation. And that's all due to developers learning how to optimize for it. So that's one thing. Ironically, the PlayStation 4 Pro is not coming with an HD Blu-ray player, or whatever they call the 4K Blu-ray drives. But they're saying it'll stream 4K from Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and stuff like that as it becomes available. And that's great and all if you have a good internet connection. Okay? Not everyone does. We'll just say that right off the bat. So, if you're looking for a cheap 4K Blu-ray player, the PlayStation 4 Pro is not going to be it, okay? At this point, you're better off probably getting the Xbox One S, because that does have an HD or 4K Blu-ray player, and it can output those video into 4K. As well as it can stream the 4K from Netflix and stuff like that. But it also does have the physical DVD player. So if you go out and buy the Ultra HD version of The Revenant or whatever, you can watch that if you have a 4K TV through the Xbox One S with HDR on your television. Now, it is something else that was brought about with the PlayStation 4, is HDR, or high dynamic range for color. Again, like 4K TVs, there are not a lot of televisions out right now that support HDR. Alright? I mean, essentially, at this point, if you really want to get the best out of the Xbox One S, the PlayStation 4 Pro, or the upcoming Scorpio, you're gonna need to get a new TV. It's just all there is to it. You're gonna have to get a 4K TV that supports the version of HDR that each console supports, because you never know. The Xbox One S, I can't remember which version of HDR that supports. I don't remember which version of HDR the PlayStation 4 supports, but I don't think they're the same ones. You don't know what the Scorpio is going to support yet. Probably the same one as the Xbox One S. But again, if you don't have a monitor capable of supporting it, then you're not going to get the benefit from it. So, overall, I'm not really sure how well this is going to do for Sony. It might just still do well for people who haven't yet bought a PlayStation 4. It might not. I mean, again, 4K TVs are not the norm. We've only pretty recently, in the past couple years, have gotten to 1080p televisions becoming the norm for a lot of people. So now moving up to a much more expensive display, as well as looking for the ones with the correct HDR support, well, you're possibly looking at a lot of money here just to get a new console. And it's the same for the Xbox One, or the Xbox Scorpio, Project Scorpio. Again, I know that Phil Spencer had said how you really won't notice much of a difference if you only have a 1080p, which is false, okay? If you have a 1080p and the console is TV or monitor, whatever you're playing on, and the console is capable of pushing out better than that, it will make the game look much better at 1080p. Okay? It'll be smoother. It will have definite 1080p native support. It might have, both of these consoles might have 1440p native support, although there aren't a lot of 1440p TVs out there. You get that more with computer monitors than you do with televisions. But I don't know. This whole 4K thing, like I said, the PS4 Pro is not going to be pumping out 4K at 60 frames per second. That's even been shown again with The Last of Us, that was running in native 4K, but it was locked at 30 frames per second. Can it do 4K 30 frames per second natively? There's a possibility. I don't know if it'll be consistent 30 frames per second, but there's definitely a possibility. Will it be able to pump out 1080p and 1440p games at 60 frames a second? Absolutely. The architecture is well well beyond being able to push that stuff out without a problem. And that's going to go for the Scorpio as well. I mean, you look at how it is, and I know some people are going to be, well, you can't really compare PC graphics cards and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're right. You can't. Because actually the PC graphics cards have an advantage that they have their own RAM built in. As a matter of fact, the GTX 980 Ti, which I'm running, has 6 gigabytes of GDDR5 just for that. Okay? So then if you're running a system with, say, 8, 16, 32 or more gigabytes of RAM, plus you have a nice i7, like a 4 or 6 core i7, you're going to destroy 1080p games. Okay? I only game at 1080p on my monitor. And I'm crushing I have a 144 hertz monitor. And for the game that you're seeing behind you, Diablo, as a matter of fact, it actually is running at a higher than 1080p resolution, and then it's being downscaled, and I still push 135 to 140 frames a second in Diablo 3 at that resolution. So there is no question about the 1080p abilities of the 980, the 980 Ti, and stuff like that. And again, I sit there and I pretty much am pretty sure that the PS4 Pro 1080p native, no problem. 60 frames a second, no problem. 1440p 60, possibly. I'm not exactly sure how well like the 970 and the 1060 do at 1440p, but that's something that can be looked up. And then the Scorpio, 6.2 teraflops is what they're saying, or what is rumored right now, which would put it right at the Titan X mark. I'm also assuming that this is also going to be running the same technology that is being used in the RX 480 by Radeon, or AMD on their Radeons, and just probably a higher quality one that would be being used more for the mid-range as opposed to the low end, which is what AMD has released so far. They haven't really started going into the mid-range and or the high-end PC market yet with this chipset. So what do you guys think? Do you think the PS4 Pro is worth it? Do you think the Xbox Scorpio is going to be worth it? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, dislike, and subscribe. Thank you.
I must wait longer. returning to town.
Your valor.
My power grows.
Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. Either way, I'm good. Also, if you enjoyed the video and wish to help support in making more, consider visiting my Patreon page located in the description below. And again, thank you very much.